What do you get when you cram politics into actual sciences where it never belonged in the first place? But hey, I guess that's how you get ahead in life when you're stepping on those around you in just a real mad grab for power. Well, apart from one person running his mouth, which is me, you also get the outbreak of a disease that starts burning low and slow at first, but with the possibility of a looming mutation within the strain, you get an unmitigated disaster. In the city of Taipei, a virus simply known as the ALVIN virus is one that is just about to completely wreck everything and everyone, just really doesn't know it yet. Seeing as it's an election year, the government is very quiet about the outbreak of the disease. Despite the warning from virologists actively working with the ALVIN virus and keeping tabs on it, the politicians decide, hey, screw it, I need them votes, boy! But what good are votes when you're just leading a bunch of people boiled down to their most basic urges? Well, as you might imagine, things don't go too well. As many people become sick, this would ultimately plunge the whole nation into chaos as it continues to spread and ransack all forms of control, whether that be government or just people trying to stay alive. In today's episode, we'll discuss a summary of the movie, how the disease spreads, where it comes from, and ultimately, what are the effects to the human neurological symptoms that would promote the absolute brutality seen in this movie. Oh, and if you haven't seen it yet, it is kind of gory, but I'm not trying to get my channel just yeeted into oblivion. It's definitely worth a watch, but that crap about being mentally scarring, it's like, bro, it's a zombie flick. You're not actually watching people get got. I don't know, people can be big babies. Anyhow, moving on. So we start off our story with credits that actually show a really cool visualization of viruses attacking cells and antibodies being formed in order to stop them. And then we start our story with a couple laying in bed, Kat and Jim. Jim and Kat are supposed to be going on vacation soon, but Jim is going to have to work as he's got a new job lined up and apparently he's been unemployed for a while. As Kat gets upset at him for breaking this news, she tells him that it takes a lot for her to get out of work and he makes the cardinal sin of just telling her to tan on the roof. Practical, but not what she wants to hear. Well, they're gonna wish they had probably left for vacation a week earlier by the end of this thing. As he goes to get food for the day, he starts clicking through YouTube, which fourth wall, and he passes by things that I can't even remotely read, but I get the idea. Basically, everyone is talking about this new virus called the ALVIN virus. In one show, a virologist, actually chief virologist, is panic-strickenly trying to tell the host about the virus and its potential to mutate, and that they need to take this seriously. But this is the human race, and we never really take stuff serious until it's beating down our doors. As he discusses the virus, he makes the connection that the virus comes from a family of rabies virus, and if it were to change, it could be a massive threat to public health. But again, the host sort of just relates it to the election, so whatever. As Jim goes out on his patio, he looks out and spots an older woman on the roof. As she turns around, her gown has a ton of blood on it, which is always a great sign that everything is going to be fine in the city this morning. Kat ends up startling him, and he asks her if she saw that. He turns around and she's gone, but now his neighbor is outside and he is sick. As he waters his plants, he tells Jim that he's not going to go to the doctor and be told to go home and get rest. This man is on a fast track to a medical degree. So here we see the first example of true insanity. Jim didn't charge his phone last night while he slept. He waited till the next morning and charged it before he left, and then he just leaves without it. The absolute mad lad. As Jim and Kat drive along, they spot a cop trying to subdue someone absolutely losing it, while a mom screams and there's like a tiny outline of a person under a sheet, so that's probably not good. As Jim drops Kat off, he says, my bad for slowing down, but I really think that's just human nature, my dude. And as Jim drives back the way he came, he finds the cop car is still there, but all the cops have left and also left their high-vis jackets, which is a little strange. Stopping off at a local restaurant, well, things are about to go to complete crap. He orders a coffee as the woman from the roof earlier walks in, and she's not here to order the house special. She grabs a deep fryer basket and dumps it on the cook, grabbing at his skin. Now, this is probably gonna need to be blurred, but let me tell you, it just turns his face into like Play-Doh, basically. So another guy gets up, and this actually happens before the basket, and gets vomit in his mouth, and then quickly begins turning and attacking his friend, starting the outbreak here. The woman then walks Jim out, as then she's hit by someone who also appears afflicted with the same illness, getting glee from hitting her. So now the whole city is descending into chaos, as the infected are actively either trying to induce great harm to the uninfected, or just straight up ending them for funsies. Jim runs back to his apartment, going and getting an ice-cold Pepsi out of the fridge, which is gross. Actually, I have no idea if he's drinking Pepsi, but he is drinking Pepsi. Nasty. He calls Kat, but it's not going through, as also every channel on the TV has the same emergency message, except for like this cartoon, which I have no clue what is happening. Maybe like a representation of the human sadistic levels, but no, wait a minute. As he gets up and walks away, something is happening on the TV that, it looks like the wolf is doing something to someone. Anyways, moving on. But over the loudspeaker, a voice comes out as someone is clearly giving instructions under the influence of the ALVIN virus. Then behind Jim appears a figure. It's your friendly neighborhood hedge clipper man. Jim turns around just before getting got, but loses 2 fingers in the process. He attacks his neighbor with a toaster to defend himself and then throws deuces. Remember to always finish the job and double tap. Zombieland was right about that. But he also makes some gestures indicating that what's most important to humans is still present, even infected. As Jim walks in an alleyway, he hears virtually everyone around him is infected. He spots groups breaking people's arms and in general being mega tools to the uninfected. Getting to his scooter, he hasn't been spotted spotted, but as he starts it, he gets spotted by a group, but is able to get out of there before getting got. Meanwhile, on the train, Kat is sitting next to an older guy who tries to hit on her. She's not interested, which, take a lesson from Papa Roanoke. If she's not interested, she's just not interested. Just move on. Rejection won't kill you, I promise you. We all get rejected from time to time, so who cares? Anyhow, so he shoots his shot and misses, but this leads him to sort of like dwell on it. But as he's sitting there, rather salty, Mr. Cool Guy in the sunglasses begins crying. He then immediately begins attacking the other passengers. As a bloodbath ensues, which, I mean, okay, I get it. You really never know how you're gonna react until you're in the moment, but good lord, there's like one of him and so many people. But he's able to infect others in the process, which then turns the tide on the train, leading to Mr. Salt Extraordinaire to also become infected as he attacks the woman where Kat was sitting. As they escape from the train, they run into a tunnel to get out of there. Broham isn't letting it go and continues to follow them as he has other parts of his brain activated and he's attracted to Kat. He continues to follow them as they run into another man who is able to get a hit on the old guy before the dude then just bites off his nose and grabs the axe. Noping out of there, they are able to dive under a closing gate and exit the subway system as the guy tells them that he will see them later, which he does. Spoiler alert, it's not really pretty. Back out in the city of dreams, man, I really can't show you any of this. The roads are just littered with uninfected, now bodied. But it's not only violence. The infected seem to engage in activities the other may not be particularly up for. So basically, baseline instinctual functions have completely overwhelmed the mind. Jim sees one guy and then bolts out of there, but Jim continues to ride out of the main part of the city, but finds the exit through the mountains via a tunnel is completely blocked by cars. So he finally stops to check on his hand, which is probably a little alarming, so he ends up taping it up. As he looks around, he checks his phone, but realizes that he needs something in order to defend himself with before finding what appears to be a scythe. Hearing a scream further on, he goes to investigate it with scythe in hand. He spots 4 younger guys beating up one guy. They end up knocking him out, but then like put up barbed wire and then run his crotch into it, which ugh. As they go to remove his undergarments, Jim shows up and just straight up breaks a kid's sternum, it looks like, before running them off, which is a little strange because usually they don't run. As he goes to check on the guy, he turns him over and says that, the guy says that he was close and asks Jim why he stopped them. Very good. Though that pretty much indicates that he's infected. And as he lumbers towards Jim, the kids then show back up with rocks and start trying to run him off, or just knock him out with rocks so they could probably run his crotch into barbed wire. And that's what you get for helping. So at the hospital, everyone's about to realize how bad it actually is. As Kat gets in with Molly, a broadcast starts. They measure Molly's temperature, which is hilarious as she's sweating and has stress responses going, which will likely increase her internal temperature anyways. So really measuring her temperature does nothing. But as they treat her, they bring her to the back and Molly is now mega attached to Kat because she saved her, at least for a moment. It's not going to be good. So now the broadcast officially begins playing. The top generals in China and the president are talking about how this will be overcome and it's just a disease. Now the country itself is Taiwan, so, you know, China and all that. Kat gets the guy's phone who she punched in the face, who has a background that I think probably most people who watch this channel have. And as the president wraps up his inspirational speech, the general starts in once more, but he has sweat roll down his face. He then immediately turns and grabs a concussive force detonator. Grabbing the president, he gives his spinal cord some fresh air, as that's pretty much all that's left. Once again, I don't think I can show that, but you know, you could use your imagination. We do learn, however, that there is an infection rate of 15 to 20%, which is based on nothing, as it seems way more virulent than that. But the broadcast is then cut short as a fight breaks out and all seems pretty bad. The cop gets everything under control for a moment, but as he does, Kat looks on and spots the old man that's been after her from the train. So we need a name for him. Let's call him Dob, for dirty old bastard. Dob has an axe and Dobby isn't afraid to use it. He breaks through the glass and subdues the cop, and really nobody, not a single person, goes for the force multiplier. And things from here just sort of suck. The guy with the phone then runs and hides, leaving Molly to her fate as Dob walks back and then finds her. And then he does some stuff to her eye. Again, baser instincts at play, but really just sadism at play. So the hero then hides under the cart and continues to heroically hide. So Jim is still on his tour de Taiwan. He seems a little shaky, which probably isn't good, and we call that foreshadowing. As Kat walks along, she takes off her shoes, but Jim checks his phone to see that he's received text from an unknown number from Kat. He calls, which then gives away Kat's position, but they're able to talk for a moment, and she tells him where she is and that the situation is completely foobarred. He tells her to put the phone on silent so it won't give away her position, but then Jim looks on in a mannequin head in the water. And as he does, he kind of just straight up hallucinates, indicating that his brain meat is infected. Kat says, "Really, I love you," and he says it back and then heads to the hospital. But again, he looks shaky and the city looks crappy. Finally, Mr. Hero exits out from under the cart to see that a lot of stuff is happening. Shield your virgin eyes, fellow subscribers. But as he moves on, he runs into Molly, who isn't too happy about what just happened to her, and he just let it, and she's also infected. So she's basically maniacally sadistic, so maybe she is happy, I don't know. But But she gets the bone saw out and just completely disassembles him from his factory build as he's held down by a group of others. Meanwhile, where Kat was, others find the area that she was in. They then sniff her shoes, which is bizarre, and she blocks the door with a railing, but Dob is able to get through. But just as he does, he then turns around and closes it and lets the others know that this is actually personal and I'm gonna go for her myself. Dob continues talking smack about eyeball fluids on his area as Kat hides. He looks down and notices one of the fire extinguishers is gone as Kat blinds him for a moment and begins smacking him in the face. He then starts into his speech about, we're not so different, you and I, but really they are. She's doing it for survival, he's doing it for pleasure. I mean, there's probably a difference there. So she turns his face and brain into cherry oatmeal before a door opens. It's Taiwan's top virologist from earlier, who literally tried to warn everyone, but they didn't listen, so that's pretty standard. Because really, there was nothing to suggest human-to-human contact, which was confirmed within 140 characters, but let me ask you, who would say such a stupid thing? I mean, just the absolute stupidity. Hence why you don't mix politics with illness. So she tells her to shower off in disinfecting fluids, as he doesn't know if she's infected or not, which does make sense. As she does, he asks her to get rid of her infected clothing as well. As she goes to throw it away, she spots a baby in the dumpster. He starts monologuing about how he had to do this, and hey girl, what's your blood type? Do you have any antibodies? So he infects her with a surprise infection to see if she will turn. In 5 minutes, he will check on her, but if she's not changed, then he will bring her back up to the roof so that the government can pick them up, and her blood will be used to cure the new virus. Meanwhile, Jim has now entered the building. Walking past the carnage, I don't know man, his shuffling's a little off. The virologist continues to talk about how he tried to warn everyone last year that this thing could mutate and it would drive the country into a recession. But it seems like it's driving the country a little worse into that. But I also have to say, nah bro, regardless, countries get driven into recessions because of viruses all the time. I mean, look around you. You'll be in a world of pure regression. Then he goes on to explain that what's actually happening here is going to totally ruin everything, but it doesn't matter because we'll go into a little bit more detail based on this explanation. The virus screws with the limbic systems for humans, to the point that they cannot control anything they do. The logical portion of the brain, like the frontal lobe, is overridden from survival. One man in particular had some brain damage where the limbic system was telling him that he was thirsty, so he literally drank water until he basically drowned, trying to satiate the issue. The people who are infected have all their mental faculties at their disposal, but the limbic system is overriding everything. They know what they are doing is bad, but they cannot help themselves. It's like asking someone not to blink, which might be why they immediately start to cry, as these things that they're doing are horrendous, but they are powerless to stop it, which is a total bummer. But back to the blood test. Kat goes over to her phone, and the 5 minutes and blah blah blah, but while she's in the shower, she's able to breathe on the phone and spots the code to get into the phone to unlock it. She texts Jim her location specifically as he looks and then drops the phone. As the virologist goes to check on Kat, well, she looks good to go, and that's good enough for him, because 5 minutes is definitely enough incubation time. He takes her and then begins exiting the maternity ward. As he walks, his foot breaches a corner and then gets cut off. He's attacked by 2 people as he takes out one, but the other grabs his foot and then vomits on it. He yells at Kat to kind of like pick him up, and she's sort of like, nah brah, but eventually she does as they then limp down the hallway. They then hear a smack on the door as here's Jimmy. He talks to Kat saying he promised that he would make it here, but it looks like she has a new boyfriend. Clearly Jim is infected. He attacks the virologist as he gets one shot off, but his 3D printed handheld explodes. Jim then uses a scythe on him and takes him out, but he was on the verge of succumbing to his infection anyways, so it really didn't matter. That gives Kat enough time to get behind the locked gate as she talks to Jim. Jim says the infection feels really good, but that to feel better, he's probably gonna have to do horrible things to her. He oscillates back and forth between likely his functional brain struggling for control and his limbic system, but if that gate wasn't there, there wouldn't be any control. As he tells her he loves her, which he's really just parroting what he said earlier, she's like, yeah, I'm out of here. But as she stands there, she begins drooling, which they've been known to do that. As a helicopter arrives to take her and the virologist off the roof, which the virologist is no longer even there, it's really just her. She exits to the roof, clearly in the early stages of infection. As it focuses on Jim, we hear a scream and a few shots get fired off as the government knew she was infected, and that's that. Then we get something really interesting. Australian metal, which is pretty metal. Never heard it before. The ALVIN virus arrived at a very poor time, at least for humans, because for itself, it was able to spread and exist quite happily. So you don't let anybody tell you any different. Politics ruins everything. We would let a plague spread through the planet as long as the politics associated with it were correct. And this is exactly what happened here, which created a perfect storm of spread. Now, this is just politics in general, and remember, all of us are human, with a vast majority of us capable of the same stupid decisions. decisions. We just don't have them at our disposal. Because I know that's going to probably start a flame war in the comments, but we're going to move on. The ALVIN virus not only hit at a time when the country was vulnerable, but it is also said to be in the family of viruses as the rabies virus. So to understand what the ALVIN virus does, we need to understand the neurotrophic diseases and how it affects the body. Like, look at this. I actually get to talk about rabies, and not just in a hypothetical sense. It's actually like relating to what we're talking about. What a time to be alive. So rabies, if you didn't know, is a nightmare virus. Like most neurotrophic viruses actually, rabies is just a little bit different. So I think on this channel, we are all coming to the understanding that diseases can readily enter our bodies sometimes without us even knowing. But we would like to think that surely, using this timeline, we could correct the issue. Well, first things first, when you start showing symptoms of the rabies virus, it's already too late to get help. It's already gotten to the point where you're pretty much out of time. Now, the fun part about rabies is there's an aspect of if you are bitten, you'll think like, oh, well, I would recognize it from like a dog or raccoon, right? Because being bitten by those things probably hurts. Well, if you're bitten by bats, this actually happens all the time. People don't even register that they were bitten. They didn't feel it. And a lot of times, the bite is completely asymptomatic. Not only in that scenario, but if you decide that you really aren't worried about it because you're just an ultra chad and try to outlast the generally recommended 2 weeks of incubation time, it's not even a guarantee. People have randomly begun to show symptoms almost a year later. And again, once you show symptoms, it's game over for your meat mech. Rabies, being a neurotrophic disease, means it will use your nerve cells in order to get to its ultimate goal, your central nervous system, but really also it replicates within your neurons. So let's talk about that for a moment, because there may be some people confused by this process. Rabies has adapted to the mammalian nervous system just flat out. Upon finding that delicious peripheral nervous system tissue, it will bind to a nerve growth factor known as P75. Once it is bound to this, imagine it like other viruses that are neurotrophic. They would be walking around a city to get to downtown. But with rabies, it's like taking an Uber there. In fact, its transport is so fast it beats out the small molecules known as endogenous ligands, which regularly travel along the neuron, keeping it healthy. This mechanism will transport it through the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system. From here, it will use a lot of the same methods to work its way up to the brain of a person. Once here, you're completely boned. But before getting there, there's actually 2 forms of rabies if you didn't know. The first form is what we all think about when we think about Cujo. Do you not think about Cujo? Well, he's that giant dog that had rabies, basically foaming at the mouth, aggression levels off the chart, bloodshot eyes, and aversion to water, as well as general restlessness. This is largely due to the encephalitis putting pressure on his brain, causing behavioral changes within the animal, and considering they're also in pain, this causes them to be further confused and lash out, spreading the virus further. The other forms of rabies is what's known as dumb rabies, but it's actually kind of a misnomer. Dumb rabies is when paralysis begins to set in the motor neurons as they become heavily impacted by the presence of the rabies virus and disrupted to the point that the animal will lose functionality of their limbs over time. This causes them to move slowly or not at all in the presence of other possible predators. In fact, it's story time. So when I used to do some firefighting youth stuff on the side in my town when I was a teenager, they gave us fire gear that we would show up regularly in and do firefighting stuff and training. So there was a raccoon out in front of my house in the middle of the day, which is a little odd. I knew there was a possibility that it had rabies, so I put on my gear and went out there because there's no way that thing was biting through those gloves and jacket. Well, I get up over to it and it just sort of sits there looking at me. I ended up petting it and then it just sort of slumped over. I could tell that the thing was wild, but something was probably up with its brain. I believe that this was a form of dumb rabies. It may have wanted to run, but the rabies it had resulted in paralysis or slight paralysis. The horrible thing about dumb rabies is, because it stays in the spinal cord and for the most part the peripheral nervous system, the brain is largely unaffected and mental faculties will stay functional, which is important to this discussion. Now that we have an understanding of what rabies does and how there are essentially 2 types of rabies, now we need to go into an understanding of how it spreads. Rabies is a master spreader. Mammals drool. It's what we like to do, along with really most other animals in some capacity. Using our salivary glands, the virus will replicate in the brain and then move down to these glands. But you want to know what most humans do? Well, humans kiss, or essentially we swap spit. In other animals, rabies can spread through bites and saliva entering that wound. But let me back up for a moment. Why does it matter if humans swap spit? Well, rabies is known before the viral symptoms begin really showing up to wreck you that hypersexuality has been noted in some animals as well as people who get infected. So imagine like the earliest stages of this disease, before you even know that you have it, you just get this sudden urge to go out and make out with a ton of people. Is this virus just not like a complete douche? Remember, bacteria and viruses take all the fun aspects of life and completely ruin it. But I digress. We will cover more of that in the ALVIN virus portion. So ultimately, as the infection takes deeper hold, moving down to the salivary glands gives the virus the ability to spread, as the most direct form of communicable action is to bite. But also getting spit in the eyes, nose, mouth, or wound from the infected saliva has a chance to ultimately infect you as well. But this infection time is predicated on other factors. If you were, say, bitten in the face, the infection will spread quickly. Like a face bite requires you to run, not walk to the emergency room, get the rabies immunoglobulin immunoglobulin, which are antibodies to fight the virus immediately, then get the vaccine for it, which will allow your body to fight it naturally. But the time delay between being exposed to the vaccine and the creation of antibodies requires that synthetic step with the immunoglobulin, otherwise your meat suit will run out of time to fight the virus. If you get bit, say like on the toe, you have a little more time as it needs to use the nervous system to actually traverse the body, but you still need to go in obviously. So it's mentioned that ALVIN is in a family of the rabies virus. So what is that? Belonging to the order of mononegavirales, these viruses are negative-stranded RNA genomes and are also non-segmented. They appear to look like cylinders with a conical top or a bullets, but I'm not supposed to say that on YouTube, and they specifically belong to the family of Rhabdoviridae. In this are 3 other viruses known as the lyssavirus, ephemerovirus, and vesiculovirus. And pronunciations may be a little off on that. But basically ALVIN would be the 4th virus, and let me just go ahead and correct myself here. There's actually other viruses within this family as well, but in this specific scenario, ALVIN would be the 4th virus, having apparently recently been discovered. Now, the thing to know about the family is they don't all do the same thing. You have rabies, which completely destroys you. Then you have the lyssavirus, which completely destroys you. I know it's called the ephemerovirus, but I'm going to call it the ephemeral virus because that's also what it's described as. But this results in muscle stiffness and body issues are abound, but it doesn't always result in your end. And with vesicular virus, it's mostly asymptomatic, but it does have the ability to present, in which case it presents a lot like the flu, but usually it does not result in your end. So despite being in the same family, the outcomes of contracting these diseases are not the same. Enter the 4th virus, known as the ALVIN virus. This virus clearly has its roots in the Rhabdoviridae family, but at first it was not that aggressive. It appears as the virus spreads, it was relegated to the, you basically need to go home and rest, meaning that it was likely closer to the vesiculovirus in terms of pathophysiology. But something happened that nobody saw coming, which is completely dumb because it happens all the time. The virus mutated. See, that's the largest issue with viruses. They too like to propagate, but most importantly, they rely on cellular functions to create more of themselves. And what do our cells do well but not perfect? Basically everything. Even with mitosis, the process isn't 100% perfect, which results in minor issues to build up over time, which leads to aging and eventually yours and mine's end. A bummer, but we are getting there concerning turning that around, but probably not in our lifetime, or if it is, only the super rich could probably afford it, which is also a total bummer. But regardless of the panic induced by shuffling off our mortal coil, the mutation is what led to the issues seen in the sadness. Prior to this, again, it was more likely around the danger level of the vesicular virus. Mostly asymptomatic, but if you did display it, you could rest up in quarantine as not to spread to others and survive the process as your body clears it. The reason is, while it can infect humans, it doesn't specifically seem adapted to our bodies at the beginning. But you know what wasn't also specifically adapted to us at the beginning? The current virus running around right now. Ever wondered why we can't seem to shake it? Well, it too has mutated several times, and at this point, the dominant strain is better able to infect without destroying the host for the most part. However, that does not mean there weren't strains of said virus that weren't absolutely devastating. In fact, several in South America were so bad that they never made it past just a few people because they ended up destroying their body's function too quickly, like alarmingly quickly. They didn't even have a chance to infect others. Other variants have infected because they produced little symptoms, if any at all, allowing for them to spread to others without the host's knowledge as they weren't too impacted by the infection. This is exactly what the ALVIN virus is. As it spread amongst others, at first, it was not too much so adapted to the human body and probably hailed from either bats, pigs, or other animals in the immediate area. However, once infecting a person, then going to another person, and then to another, it would ultimately begin adapting to the human body in a way that would allow it to grow beyond just being a flu-like virus into something much worse. Likely using the nervous system pathways, its incubation time seems to decrease with each subsequent generation. The earliest generations with the new strain are symptomatic because it was able to move to the brain of a person. The body would begin reacting aggressively to clear this infection, but in futility. The earliest generation probably produced little, if any, symptoms at all, allowing it to spread in Taiwan quickly with little notice, as the reports say nobody yet had dropped from it, which opens up an interesting possibility: immunity. So what could be happening? Well, if you say got the earliest strain and you just cleared it without any issue, this may be why in some we have seen it takes longer to become infected, whereas if you just got exposed to the new virus, then you turn quickly. So potentially Jim, considering he had it for a while, may have actually contracted an earlier version of it, which allowed him to produce the antibodies necessary to combat it, but with this new virus's mutation, the antibodies didn't correctly link up or as effectively, or potentially the virus itself has a new way of skirting around those antibodies through different receptors on its surface via the mutations. As the infection spread, it appears to take less and less time to display these aggressive symptoms, as the virus has now fully adapted to the body. These mutations would have naturally arisen due to the propensity for viruses to mutate to a degree, but also the mistakes the body body will occasionally make when creating the virus. Once the shift happened, however, the ALVIN virus would go from just the sniffles to a person exhibiting a blood-crazed, sadistic mindset in which they would inflict pain on others for their own pleasure, whether it be just physical damage to the body or, other baser urges, as made mention by what rabies can do to our brains. So the question is, how is the virus doing this exactly? Well, it's clear once the virus adapted to probably using similar pathways as the rabies virus in terms of using the neuron growth factor, or P75, to reach our brains as quickly as possible. In some aspects, it would be similar to rabies, but in others, it would also far outclass its once formerly more aggressive sibling. Upon entering the body through the infected saliva that we see most infected have, this could have been done in a multitude of ways. We see Cat at the end is drooling as she quickly changes, indicating that her infection was assured and aggression followed soon after. But in other instances, we see other people literally spitting and licking other people, as well as drooling on them purposefully to infect them. We also see others will open wounds on people and then fling spit around, and that infects them. This is probably what happened on the train. Should the saliva get into the mouth, nose, eyes, or really any orifice of a person, which it most certainly does, this would cause the rapid infection as well. There is almost no immune response in which the body could launch at this point, as it happens way too fast. Even the innate would be quickly overwhelmed, so the body would not be able to get a handle on this situation. This natural selection of viruses may be why this specific variant became more prominent, as it was fast acting and able to get around the immune system, whereas other variants were clunky and slow and quickly destroyed by the immune system. This would also indicate a high rate of immunogenic behavior. Once exposed, your end is all but secured. Entering the body, it would move to the brain, but here is where it differs from rabies. In rabies, brain damage is induced typically due to encephalitis or inflammation of the brain itself. With the tissue swelling, it has nowhere to go due to the pressure of the skull, which can cause issues like tissue destruction. However, even with rabies, there is a possibility it just paralyzes you and leaves your brain intact. And this is what I believe the ALVIN virus is doing in its infection pathway. While using the nerves as a highway to get to the brain, it would travel up to the brain and into the lower portions of it, specifically the old brain, the amygdala, hypothalamus, and you know what they say, the limbic system. But how does that explain the behavior that we see exactly? Well, once entering these areas, you have to understand that the limbic system controls us in a big way. We like to believe that we, the human consciousness, are in control. Well, we aren't. We are controlled by internal processes to survive, reproduce, fight, sleep. I mean, if you think about it, our consciousness is really just a passenger on this meat mech. Now, don't get me wrong, it's highly important, but we are controlled whether we think we are or not. For instance, I have a fear of flying. I actually drove from Georgia to Colorado to visit my brother, and I'm in Colorado actually recording this. And the reason is because my amygdala, which is where fear comes from, tells me that planes can't be trusted, and if I get on one, 100% it's going down. Now, logically, I understand that they are safe. I understand that they're the safest form of transportation and blah, 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 and statistics, and yeah, everything is great, sunshine and rainbows. Yet my brain won't let me just comfortably get on a plane. Now, the other side of this is I really don't have a fear of the open water if I'm on a boat. Being in the water, no thanks. But on a boat, no fear. My brother, on the other hand, is a pilot who trusts planes just to not go down and has no issue flying, but he can't get on a boat in open water, unless it's like a cruise ship. His amygdala tells him the thing is going to sink. Why is fear so different from person to person? Well, I guess you could say it's just personalized to experience. But the point is the amygdala controls fear, and that's what controls a person. So you can overcome it, but it won't be very comfortable, I'll tell you that. Once the ALVIN virus has entered the amygdala, it could induce fear, but we really don't see that. Instead, we see it induce aggression. This aggression causes the person to attack others, but even in a blind rage, your conscious mind still does play a role in impacting the actions you do. So if the ALVIN virus were to just cause you to be rage afflicted, you might eventually just be able to get a handle on it, which would stop the virus from spreading as effectively, meaning that that line of virus would have met its end within just a few generations. So the question is, how does it keep itself going? Well, it rewards the brain. The virus does something rather interesting. It doesn't just excite the amygdala, it also heads to the hypothalamus, and then once there, unlike rabies, which subdues the spontaneous neuron activation, it instead seems to excite the neurons, causing them to fire more readily. This explains mostly what we see with their sadistic pleasure. The hypothalamus has something that it secretes that if you aren't careful, you can really mess yourself up in real life. Again, we are run by portions of our brain that literally reward us for good behavior. Is that not just totally bizarre? The brain rewarding itself is something when in theory, it could just like remember what made it survive, but it has to reward itself to really make it stick. And this reward is known as dopamine, which is the feel-good hormone. Once released, it can make people feel immense pleasure and in general, pretty good. Humans hijack it all the time with substances and activities to the point that it can actually cause us to essentially burn it out for a time as the dopamine oversaturates the receptors to the point that the brain will create more receptors, and then it takes more and more dopamine to cause the same effect. Seeing as the hypothalamus controls this and the ALVIN virus now controls the hypothalamus, which is the pleasure center of the brain, this is what causes people to crack an immediate smile across their face. And when directly asked concerning Jim, he mentions how it feels really, really good to be infected. Because honestly, it probably feels amazing and just like one giant acid trip where everything just feels like 15 out of 10. But this isn't sustainable. The reality is, likely because their brains are still consciously functional, the damage to the brain isn't pronounced, meaning that eventually it would adapt. There's a possibility that they could come down from the absolute saturation of dopamine, but only through more receptors being made. But the depression would be massive. I'm talking like life would feel like complete crap for months, if not years. Coupled with the memory of what they've just done, because amygdala excitement actually cements memories more readily within the brain, I'm sure most people would just choose to nope out. But I can hear you already. Roanoke, sure, pleasure is great, and I can see the anger aspect, but what does sadism have to do with any of this, and how does it come into play? Well, you know your boy has you covered on that as well. Sadism is something that I personally don't get. Probably because I don't have a psychiatric disorder, at least as far as I know. But sadism itself is basically deriving pleasure from the act of inflicting pain, suffering, and humiliation onto others. While we don't know everything there is to know about the connections that make it possible, it's documented that some people are really living with this issue. However, what's strange is, well, apart from literally getting pleasure from watching others in pain, is that they don't have a clear understanding of pain itself. Seeing others in pain, they rate it higher than it actually is, and versus what a non-sadist would rate that pain, meaning that their brain perceives it in a more excited way than a normal brain. When tested to see which portions of the brain were activated concerning non-sadists versus sadists, in sadists, the pictures of people in pain had greater activation concerning their amygdalas, but had a positive response in the anterior insula. The anterior insula sits within the brain above the limbic system and is supposed to process our sense of disgust when seeing mutilation and seeing something horrible. In sadists, this was a positive experience. In non-sadists, disgust was processed appropriately. Seeing how close it is to the limbic system, it's pretty clear that it is impacted by the virus much like the lower portions of the brain as well. And the last connection to this sadist behavior is something known as the frontotemporal disorder. This area of the brain resides essentially right where the temple of your skull would be, which is interesting for a multitude of reasons. Because of its location, it's obvious that it too is impacted by the virus. But by being in this location, it can disrupt the neural firing from the frontal lobe. Communication with this lobe is what gives us reason and control. Look at Phineas Gage. When a pole went through his brain during a dynamite accident, his frontal lobe was separated from the rest of his brain, and he went from being a calm and collected leader to being run by pure emotion for the rest of his life, which is tragic, but it showed us how much the frontal lobe controls the rest of the brain. By the virus causing this disorder, it's almost like a viral pole being shot through the brain, cutting off the frontal lobe's control as it can't communicate, and then it can't stop the actions. Because of this, the person is still in there. They see and understand everything they are doing, but because of the key points of the brain being excited, such as the amygdala and hypothalamus, resulting in aggression and also pleasure, with the anterior insula not processing disgust correctly, along with the sexual aggression coming into play as these areas of the brain are impacted, this causes the person to just completely lose it. And then with the frontal lobe likely being cut off with too much activity in the frontotemporal disorder, with neurons randomly firing, it just all comes together to make this. This could explain why they are crying, as made mention in the movie, as they know they're doing horrible things, but the pleasure of the action coupled with the decreased control of the frontal lobe causes them to literally not be able to control their body. It is said it's like asking someone to not blink, but I'd almost compare it to sleeping. Imagine you haven't slept in days. You're exhausted, but you are told you have to stay awake no matter what. Even without your knowledge, you might still slip into sleep because your brain hijacks control away from you and just forces you to go to sleep. That's a lot like how this virus impacts the brain. So in summation, bro, what did I just watch?